So welcome everybody. Thanks for being here today. I am Jennifer Langley. I manage our Southeast chapters for the CFO Leadership Council, as well as our national conference coming up November 11th, 12th, and 13th. I certainly hope you will all participate in that as well as being here today. I want to share some exciting news. Not only do we have the fabulous Mindy Barker as our co-chair, but now also Jack Healy has accepted the role of co-chair. He is new to Jacksonville, and I'll let him talk in just a second, but he is a founding steering committee from the Atlanta chapter and moved to Jacksonville. So we've got him starting to take a leadership role in this chapter as well. I'll do a few comments on our housekeeping and then turn it over to Jack. We basically want you to participate. So, keep your video on, mic on if you'd like. We'll try to keep us all quiet during the panel discussion, of course, and then open it up after that for questions. Please post everything in the chat area if you have any comments and questions there. And also, we will do CPE polling. So that will be some pop-up things on your screen. You can just take the poll and answer the question. And now, Jack, I'm going to turn it over to you.
No, thank you. I'm not all that new. It's moved in a year ago, Halloween. So I was very proud of the fact that we moved in Halloween and we were prepared for candy the same day. So everybody has to have a life's ambition, and that was mine. So I'm getting to know folks, and then of course COVID came down, but I've spoken to a number of you on the phone, so I hope to get to know the rest of you. First thing we want to do is always thank the steering committee members. There are a number that are on the call today, and for those of you who aren't a member or that are new to the organization, the steering committee is responsible for the programs we put together. So they come up with the topics, and all the steering committees within the CFO Leadership Council work together to try to come up with good programs. So I want to thank all the steering committee members that are on the call today. If any of them want to give a shout out, I'll let Jennifer open the mic, but otherwise we'll move on to our sponsors.
Well, ditto to Jack. Thank you to the steering committee.
All right. So we have our sponsors. We have a number of the sponsors on that I saw come on today, and we always want to give our sponsors a moment to tell us what they do. The sponsors are extremely important to all the CFO Leadership Council chapters. We have some that are national in scope, but mostly we try to get local ones. And the whole idea is they bring more to the table, and the whole idea is also for us to bring the table more to them. So I see we've got Julie with OnPay Solutions. I saw you on there. If you want to say a few words.
Hi everyone. I just finished recording a promotion for the national conference a few minutes ago, and I jumped right off that to come on here. I am the founder and chief executive officer at OnPay Solutions. We help businesses automate their accounts payable and accounts receivable without a huge burden and a heavy upfront investment. So I think that's the easiest way to explain what we do, and we're really happy to be a part of the CFO Leadership Council.
Great. So we have Angie from Ascendo.
Angie said, "You go, honey," and she's sitting right next to me. I am the lesser half of the dynamic duo that is Angie Langlois and Pete Langlois, kind of like her Robin. I'm Robin. She's Batman. But we run Ascendo Resources here in Jacksonville. We place accounting and finance and IT professionals on a temporary, temp to perm and direct hire basis. We've been doing it for over 20 years right here in Jacksonville. Some folks that we placed as staff accountants 20 years ago and now CFOs, and they call us. I'd sure love for you, if you ever have any staffing needs, to please consider giving Angie and I a call. We'll work like heck to make sure we make a quality placement each and every time.
Great. And Pete's never lost for words. Haven't been a part of this group long, but I know that. We've got David from B of A.
Hey, good afternoon to the group. Glad to be here with you. We're a little bank out of North Carolina. You may have heard of us, sometimes in the news a little bit. Between Ken Ackerson and myself, who is my colleague who sits and helps out with this group, we cover privately held companies and deliver the commercial bank, companies that range anywhere from $5 million in annual sales up to $2 billion. Most of our clients in each market are managed by an individual relationship manager like myself in the market where the company is located. And so we work with CFOs, CEOs, and all the business owners to help deliver great advice, great resources, and happy to help any of y'all that may have a client or anybody you know that might need some of that around the business banking side. Thanks for having me.
Great. I see we have Hank from Adaptive Workday. Hank is, I think he resides near my old stomping grounds in Roswell, Alpharetta area in Georgia.
That's a fact. That's a fact check. But, I've got my eyes on, in a few years, having some real estate down where you live there. It's very attractive. So anyways, yes, I'm with Workday Adaptive Planning. And Workday, of course, offers best-in-class solutions for financial management, human capital management, and also planning. Everyone plans. We just help you do it better than anyone else. And we're also happy and proud to have on the panel one of our executive directors, Greg Pryor, today. I guess we'll, not to jump the gun, but looking forward to the meeting. Thank you all for being here.
Great. Yes, and we have a couple more that are on the panel, which we've got Elizabeth and Chris. Elizabeth from One Digital. I'll let you give a commercial.
Sure. I am Elizabeth Crane from One Digital. I'm actually here in Atlanta, but Lee Mills, who is a part of your steering committee as well, helped make the connection here. And One Digital is an employee benefits consulting firm and brokerage, and we're a national firm, but we have a great presence in Jacksonville as well.
And Hank, you saw that we have Jody Goldstein is also here from your firm. And then Lori Palmer from NetSuite, Oracle.
Yes, hi everyone. I am with Oracle NetSuite, and I'm based out of the Tampa area personally, but we are global, all over the place, and offer full suite of business products from CRM through the ERP and consolidation for global businesses, and everything that a company needs to run their business and certainly handle the remote challenges that are here today. I'm happy to be on this call and love learning from all the panel members every time I'm on. So thank you for having me.
So Chris Walker is going to be our running the program today, but I'm going to let you do a quick commercial for Lippis Mattheis.
Appreciate it, Jack.
Sorry.
Chris Walker with Lippis Mattheis. Very pleased to be here. We're a full-service law firm with offices on the East Coast, including an office in Jacksonville. And we boast over 125 lawyers at this point, in pretty much every practice group you can think of. And really look forward to getting into this panel discussion. And obviously, if we can ever be of any assistance, I know I've worked with a couple of you since joining the group. We'd love to get to know y'all and see if we can't help out on anything for you.
Great. I just want to talk about a couple of upcoming events. Did I miss any sponsors? I'm sorry. Before we move on, did I miss any? Not hearing any, but you see on that slide, we have a number of wonderful sponsors. So on December 8th, we have streamlining process, a great customer experience. Customer experiences are getting a lot more play. Bob Riddle, who's on the panel today, he and I work with a customer experience group out of San Diego, and they've been extremely busy. The COVID has actually forced customers to really examine how their customers interact with them. And also it's required companies to change because their customers are changing. So the customer experience is extremely important. On the 26th, we have planning the new normal lessons learned. That's an optimistic program title. So hopefully we have learned and we've moved on. And the hope is perhaps maybe by January 26th, we're actually back together again. That would be very nice. Just for those of you on the call who are not members, I would like to point you to the membership. It's really quite inexpensive, and what you get for it is tremendous. It's one silver lining in what we've gone through in the past 7 months or so has been that we've had access to all the programs from all the different chapters, and Jennifer has done a great job of letting us know what the other Southern chapters are doing. So you can join, you can sit in on any meeting. If there's a reason why you don't have your CPE credits in this environment, you obviously can't multitask watching a webinar and do your work at the same time. But joining the group has a number of benefits. You can be online, you can do the in-person. And one of the other benefits is the national conference, which we're going to talk about in a second. So if you have any questions, you should reach out to Mindy or myself or Jennifer or anybody on this panel that you may know. Just reach on out and we can talk to you about that. So coming up, we do have our CFO Leadership Conference, November 11th, 12th, and 13th. And that is virtually, of course. They've put together, last year it was in Boston. And that's, of course, the mothership of the CFO Leadership Conference. And last year they had the CFO of the Boston Red Sox, and they really had a top-notch group, and I didn't think they could top it. And this year they do. As you can see, they have the CFO from Twitter. If they don't, if they're allowed to talk and they don't censor themselves. And then I wanted to see if the CFO of Peloton actually works while riding her bike. I think that would be interesting as well. But if you look at the companies they have some absolutely top-notch CFOs. And the program goes on for several days, but they're in blocks of times. And it's well worth it. It's free to premium members. Again, a premium membership isn't all that expensive. So it's something that you should look into, and it's really well worth it. Hopefully we'll be back together again. I always found the networking there. It was last year at that meeting that I met a number of the people from Jacksonville. Actually, that's where I met Mindy. Jennifer made sure we sat at the same table. But it's virtually, you'll be able to network as well. And the content has been fantastic. And that's come out of that group, really high level stuff. Now for today's program feature, if I had a drum roll, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. But today's panel is successfully managing, engaging your newly formed remote workforce. And I'm looking forward to hearing all this great information. Chris, I'm going to kick it to you.
Awesome. Well, Jack, thanks so much. I want to thank everybody for taking the time today. If you can't hear me, having problems hearing me, I am monitoring the chat, or if you have any questions that you want to pose to the panel while I'm kind of moderating, feel free to open up the chat box, shoot a chat out to me. I'll take a look at it. We'll try and accommodate as many questions as we can. I'm hopeful this should be a pretty interactive panel. I had somebody ask me, what does a lawyer have to do with moderating this panel about COVID technology and remote workforce? And I told them absolutely nothing. And that is the truth. I'm here to moderate this so I can take away all of these suggestions and informations and implement them for my workforce. So very candidly, this was a very selfish decision to decide to moderate this panel. I just want to touch off by saying, we've all been affected by COVID in various ways. And in prepping for this panel, I had a chance to speak with our panelists. And I got to tell you, some of the things that they brought forth that I'm excited to talk about today with them was just some eye-opening experiences. So I would encourage each of you that are listening, and frankly, even if somebody listens to this presentation that's recorded afterwards, reach out to them. They really do have some awesome insights, some awesome ideas that I think that we all frankly could benefit from as we kind of work through this new world. So before we dive into the panel questions, I wanted to give each panelist maybe 2 or 3 minutes to introduce themselves, give a little bit of their background. I told Bob earlier that I was coming at him first, and what I meant by that actually was I'm going to let him introduce himself first. So Bob, no pressure, but you're going to kick off the panel. Maybe give us 2 or 3 minutes of your background, who you are, where you come from. I think that would be helpful to us all.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm an independent consultant now. I've been with many consulting firms, several consulting firms, maybe is a better way to say it. The Andersons is where I grew up. Anderson Consulting, Arthur Anderson Business Consulting. Worked for Perot Systems for a while. I've had a number of executive positions with General Motors and with Staples. And so it's all been around IT and how to use IT to make businesses work. And so now I'm an independent consultant that does that. I assist clients, boards and C-levels, primarily executive teams, to think about what they should be doing with technology to make their businesses operate better.
Great. Next on the panel is Greg. Greg had some, I'm excited to talk about Greg as well. It's some great insight from Workday. Greg, would you mind giving us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris, and so glad to meet everyone, at least virtually here. Thanks for the opportunity. I probably have sort of 3 primary roles at Workday. I have had the privilege and pleasure to be part of what we call our People and Purpose team. Hank was kind enough to introduce Workday a little bit. We've got about 13,000 workmates around the world now, primarily providing finance, HR, and planning technology. When I joined the company, we had about 2,000 folks 7 years ago, and today we're nearly 12,000. So quite a bit of growth in my tenure. I also have the privilege to spend lots of time with our great customers around the world, talking about how to use technology to enable their workforce. And then I spend quite a bit of time with various academic and thought leaders on the future of work. I do think that we have, in the last 10 months or so, probably fast forwarded about 10 years into the future of work, maybe to some people's chagrin. But yeah, happy to share some perspectives on some of the things we're doing at Workday, but also what we're seeing our customers and thought leaders do around the world.
And Elizabeth, last but certainly not least, some would say we saved the best for last. Maybe you would mind give us a little bit of your background for us.
Sure. Elizabeth Crane, and as I mentioned earlier, I work for One Digital. I'm the Chief People Officer for them. I've been with the company for about 12 years now, and my background is actually in the financial services industry, managing marketing and communications teams. And about 6 years ago, I moved into this Chief People Officer role, mainly to manage all of the people functions, so HR and training, talent development, talent acquisition, and benefits, but also culture and how we communicate that throughout the company. My experience both at One Digital and my prior 2 companies are getting in when the company is very small and working with what it means to teams as they grow quickly through acquisition. So One Digital's growth, when I joined, we were about 100 people. We're about 2,300 people now across the nation, and making small acquisitions from 5 to 150 people throughout the course of the year. And so I've had a lot of experience really with growth and how we manage that and change, and how to help your people really deal with that and deal with new normals.
That's awesome. Well, Elizabeth, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. I'm excited about this panel. So I'm going to kick this off and say the following, which is to say, in anticipation of this panel, I did a little bit of research and came across a really interesting article by McKinsey. It was just published October 5th, 2020. And they basically came to the conclusion that 80% of their panelists have stated that they agree or strongly agree that their businesses from a technology and remote workforce panel have been changed for the duration of their company's existence. So I want to open this up to the panel first, maybe directed a little bit more towards Bob on the implementation side, Elizabeth and Greg maybe on the people side. That kind of a response, 80% of the respondents to a McKinsey panel says that their business model for managing a remote workforce has changed. Tell me what you guys think about a response like that. How do you manage a company? 80% of respondents saying their business models have changed. What do you have to be thinking about as a CFO or a high-level executive to mentally begin processing a statement like that?
Did you want to go to me first, Chris?
Well, maybe, yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective on just maybe the implementation side of this from an IT strategy standpoint first.
Yeah, sure. Happy to address that. I think what companies are seeing as the workforce is more remote is that some of what they took for granted when people were in the same building and potentially in the same work area, some of those processes and technologies just aren't adequate for the new world we find ourselves in. So we talked a little bit before about the importance of a standard technology configuration, right? If you've got if you've got people that used to sit in the office and they could just walk down the hall and talk to the IT support folks, and now they're not, and that the IT support folks have to diagnose and fix problems. If you've got a variety of platforms that people are working on, that's a problem. And I think we may get into this later, so I don't want to go too deep, but the need for collaboration technologies like Zoom, Zoom is the probably the most used and the easiest to just adapt to. Sorry.
That's okay.
There are a number of others.
Like that. Let me be clear. 2020 feels like that. Okay.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, sorry. I should have muted it before we got on. But Zoom's fairly easy because it feels, as weird as it is, it feels natural. We're at least talking face to face. But there are other technologies, group chat technologies and workflow and task-oriented technologies that can be very valuable. And I think companies are just starting to figure out if they want to use them and how they want to use them. Well, and so there's a learning curve.
Let me ask this, Bob, and not to interrupt the other panels, but I want to dive into that point a little bit. We talked on the panel before, and I'd love just the other panelists to chime in as well. I counted that prior to COVID-19, I probably know how to use 2 or 3 online collaboration tools. Before getting on this call today, I now have 16 different logins to 16 different programs to use 16 different things. Tell me a little bit about how do CFOs manage this across organizations? And then frankly, how do you manage the people and their expectations and the stresses that come along with it?
Yeah, it's really tough. I'm sorry, Greg, I interrupted there, but it is really something that leadership across the board is feeling the stress of how to collaborate. And what we found in our own organization and in others is that many of us during this time period have overcompensated. And so people like you, Chris, have all of these different tools to communicate with. And consequently, the confusion, it's led to less collaboration because people don't know where to go to get what information. There's too much coming together, and so they're missing. And so I think the opportunity for all of us now is to really take a step back, audit all of these tools, and understand what is being used most, what's most useful, and then start to eliminate some of them, and then clearly define where people should go to do certain tasks or find certain information, and just be a lot more clear about that.
Greg, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think, and actually that stat, while staggering, clearly staggering, if you think about it, right? To your point, overwhelming. I think about our own workforce, right? Our account executives engaging typically with our customers in real time, in real places, traveling to them, have not done that in the last 7-8 months. I think about our go lives. Our good friends at General Electric went live over the weekend on Workday and basically did the last 9 months of their implementation with completely remote workforces doing that work. I think about our marketing colleagues as an example. We typically would have had last week 12,000 of our biggest customer fans together in Las Vegas for Workday, or I guess in San Francisco this year for Workday Rising. That was all done as virtual events. So I think across the functions, not to even think about our software developers who typically worked in local Scrum teams and would have stand-up meetings every morning to talk about our now digital. So I think and this is clearly not even our frontline workforces, our amazing frontline workforces who have kept us all going. Easy for us who were able to, cocoon and watch Netflix. I think about just the challenge of our FedEx and UPS and Whole Foods and the people who kept us all going. So it doesn't surprise me. At least from my perspective, maybe for the most part, what I saw was a bit of what I refer to now as a COVID chasm. There were those folks who I think were on a trajectory to understand how to operate digitally and remotely, and they generally did pretty well. They had some of the systems that Bob and Elizabeth talked about in place, and then there were many, unfortunately, who were really left behind in this digital divide. We actually, and I know we geeked out a little bit about this on our pre-call, but we do something called Feedback Friday at Workday. So we actually pulse our entire workforce every Friday, and we've been doing this for years. Going into the work remotely situation, we actually had a situation where our remote workers, our folks who are working at home, were having a slightly better experience than our office-based workers. And so that gave us maybe just a little bit of wind in our sails. Obviously, there was no way we weren't going to let everyone, safeguard them by working from home. But it was interesting to have that data and to know upfront, are you creating the support? Are you creating the mechanisms to have to be agile? So, a fascinating statistic, though.
Interesting. Well, so I want to dive into one other point on this. We started talking a little bit about the use of these various technologies and having access to them in a centralized place to kind of use something. And I had a follow-on question for that, and I'll open it up to the panel. One of the things that I'm sure a lot of the folks on this call think about from the CFO perspective, the banking perspective, is how safe and secure is my data? Who can get to it? And how can they get to it, right? And I know, there's been 2 or 3 clients since COVID, they've pushed everything to the cloud, they're migrating data, and they've been ransomware attacked. Bob, maybe you could talk a little bit about, what are some good policies and procedures that, Elizabeth mentioned, and I think Greg was hinting to it, getting this information in one place and making sure we have these. What are some best practices we could look at in managing our workforces such that we are complying with, some good IT security without overwhelming them?
Yeah, I'll take that first since I'm the IT guy. Obviously, it's a bit of a different world. The one thing that scares the daylights out of me on behalf of most of my clients is endpoint security, right? You can have a VPN and you can have a secure cloud and you can have a secure server environment. But frankly, if your workers are working from home on a Wi-Fi network that doesn't have adequate security, or they're working from Starbucks where somebody next to them might be able to, sneak into their system by hook or by crook and put a keystroke logger there, all of a sudden that VPN isn't all that protective anymore because the bad guy can have login credentials. And so I would encourage you all, if you haven't thought about it, think about educating your employees about what they need to be doing with their individual workstations and their Wi-Fi and how they need to behave when they're in public locations, and frankly, how to be aware of nasty emails that give them bad links. That there are lots of ways for the bad people to sneak into your systems, and if you're not thinking about all of them, you're probably going to get hurt.
And so maybe I'll push that out a little bit to Elizabeth and Greg, kind of from the human capital side. So Greg, you used the word atrophy, which I think is a great word here. I know in our workforce, we've seen people that, they didn't pay necessarily attention to this before, and now that they're at home, the fear is they're paying even less attention. How do you get people to engage on this and realize this is a real thing? I mean, now they're at home on their personal Wi-Fis. How do you get people to recognize that and manage those expectations?
Elizabeth, I'll let you
Oh,
start.
sure. I was going to say that one of the things that we have done is we have instituted mandatory training and testing where everything is tracked. in Workday. Actually, we push it out through that. And so we have security training and where everybody has to learn about all of that. They have to understand what a phishing email might look like and all of those different pieces. So we've done that, but then we've also set up our systems with multi-factor authentication. I'm worried that I might say it the wrong way. So Bob, correct me if I'm not saying,
right on.
if I'm not technically correct. But so all of these different pieces as well, because our operations are on the cloud. We actually had a major new technology rollout that was planned for right before we all went home for COVID. We decided to delay it for a couple of months while we get through all of this, and then really couldn't delay it anymore. So the past few months, we have gone through our entire agency management system has been changed remotely. And so we've gone through some major changes, and this security is part of us being able to manage to that. We have so much data from other our clients and those sources that we have to be so careful of. And so it's really important that the training and the knowledge and all of the checkpoints are there from the perspective of protecting all of that data.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just add, again, I think what's been, this has been a fast forwarding for so many of us, and in some ways not in hard and difficult times, but I do think, I think it has fast forwarded our folks into thinking about, how do I use these digital technologies? How do I become sort of a digital citizen, if you will? We call the sort of the youngest generation in the workforce the digital natives now, because they were born on, on these technologies, grew up on iPads and turn to physical magazines and try to swipe pages, on them. But I do think that, for so many people, we've had that. And then what we've also seen is this other side, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about, which is the atrophy of connections. We have seen, and I'm a big fan of McKinsey and some of the great research that they're doing. We've generally seen a rise, most organizations have seen a rise in productivity for a variety of reasons. And yet, while Bob, I think, stays awake at night worrying about endpoint security, I'm equally staying up at night worrying about network atrophy, and the fact that even as great as Zoom is, and I'm a big fan, we are definitely seeing in our data within Workday and our own company and with others, that people are getting disconnected, that they are, and unfortunately, as we talked a little bit about, it's particularly our women in the workforce, and it's women who have care responsibilities. There are tremendous statistics coming out in the last few weeks about the number of women that are leaving the workforce right now because, I totally appreciate you can't do this all. You can't do all the Zoom work and continue to, do homeschooling. And so we are seeing really unfortunate impacts, particularly on specific groups of people. And so I think while the digital side has some real upsides, what we also have to look at is, increased loneliness, effects on mental health, and just a general, what I sort of think about as a human energy crisis that is emerging, because we're not around people and our energy is not getting built. There's not momentum in our system. It's like every day you have to start and jumpstart everything you're doing. So I'm pleased that productivity for most companies has had a bit of a boost and didn't suffer horrible headwinds that we might have expected. And yet, when we're looking at this for the longer haul, I think that there are there's a longer tail to this that we need to be paying attention and helping people return some of that sense of connection.
Greg, I'm glad you weighed into that perfectly. So thank you so much. You're doing my job, making it easy for me. Let's dive into that for a second, right? Let's dive into this for a couple minutes. So you mentioned the productivity in the workplace and the fact that you're seeing more increased productivity. And I actually had some time to think about this and digest what we chatted about in our pre-panel meeting. And my initial thought was, and I'd love to get the panel's perspective on this, do you think that increased productivity is something that is here to stay, meaning it's going to be something we see over the long run? And if so, why? Or do you think that increased productivity is something that is kind of like that initial jolt? It's something new, it's something different, we're re-engaged, and eventually we're going to have that same kind of quasi lackluster that we have to deal with from time to time with our employees to really motivate them. I'd love to hear the panel's perspective on that.
I think that there's going to continue to be a roller coaster around productivity. I know that we also pulse our team, and in the first quarter, everybody felt like there was a huge rise in productivity. Everyone was very focused and in trying to figure out even how to get things done, but they were really like, okay, this is a finite period of time, and we're really looking at everything that we need to do and spending the time that we need to do that. Then there came this drop at the beginning of the summer where people took a little bit of a breather. Kids were out of school. There were different things, and we realized like this is going to take a lot longer than what we thought. And so we saw a little bit less productivity there. And I think I mentioned in our pre-conversation the stress from all of our employees was matched by this stress that our leaders were feeling to give empathy and flexibility to everyone to be able to help them deal with the stress of all of this, but also trying to figure out how they manage productivity and keep that up while being flexible and empathetic to all of the stress that everybody's going through. And since that, we've seen another rise in productivity. And I would say like we're getting into a major stress period right now where people are, there's a lot going on in society. Schools are still in, out. There's just so many different factors that are impacting and coming at us from different directions. Greg, I'm sure that your studies and everything that you do have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, no, Elizabeth, in general, again, what we see in the broad research is exactly what you described. An initial bump, which was somewhat counterintuitive. People rallied. For the most part, people rallied. And luckily, we had some of the tools in place that allowed people to rally. Then we definitely saw a bit of a dip. You know, we even saw, as we look at things, even at our own company, is people canceled holidays and vacations. And people said, well, why would I take time off? Even though, in fact, this is when we really needed it. Why would I take time off, to go to my living room where I normally work from? And so, we saw some of that. I do think we then saw generally a bit of a drop. And I think for me, I think it's this, I think we're going to discover this really interesting thing around this sort of what I call the oscillation of work is what we were able to do was heads down work. We were able to do a bit better. We were not distracted by the water cooler, by the lunch, by, some people going to lunch, by other things, just even watching our own environments. It was less going on in my office than there was typically, my home office. But I do think what we should be cautious of for the long term, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Elizabeth and Bob as well, is the innovation. What we're losing in this connection, in the spontaneity, in that let's go out to lunch and learn new things, or even just when we're coming back from a meeting, people leaving a meeting and learning new things with each other. That's just evaporated. And what we know through some of the research is that what really happens here, that's where innovation, that's where the spark of an idea, that's where you connect with someone to say, I didn't know you were working on that. I have an interest in that. And so I do think what's happening and what we see technically is this loss of some of what we call these bridging connections. They're not necessarily the 7 to 9 people you work most directly with, but they're the next circle of people. It's your marketing person, it's your finance person who you just don't come across as frequently. And so that, at least in the research I've been reading and folks I've been talking about, that's where this network atrophy or connection atrophy or relationship atrophy is starting. And I do think, as we think about just the future of work, how do we consider some of this in planning? How do we think about this from where do I have skills that may not be as connected? Where do I have ideas? Where do I have execution, teams that could be executing? So I do agree with Elizabeth. We've actually weathered the storm generally pretty well, most organizations, but the fighting the energy crisis, having the type of innovation, the serendipity, some of those, and then obviously all of the mental stress is we're in for I think a tough next wave.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, thinking about what Elizabeth and Greg just said, I'm reminded of the book A Team of Teams. I don't know if anyone has read that. It's really about a military approach to trying to solve some similar problems, where the challenge was how to get inter-team communication effectively to support individual team operations. And they came up with a number of really innovative ideas. If you haven't read the book, I would suggest it. It's very much about the military, but it's also very much applicable to what we're talking about here as a way to force some of these connections that used to happen naturally in the business that we're used to and don't anymore. And there are ideas about how to kind of force people to be in different work groups for a while, or force there to be cross-functional work groups that communicate on a regular basis and have some technology to support them. I don't think we've cracked the code on that yet, but I do think there are some of those ideas, and unfortunately, it's going to look like an added cost. But it's a way to leverage or to solve some of the problems that Greg in particular is talking about with the loss of connectivity, some ways to kind of force and encourage that connectivity. And it's also part of the problem is you can see the cost of that, but it's very difficult to see the benefit side, except over the longer term. But I do think if you don't do that, to use another analogy, it's like continuing to saw without sharpening the saw. You'll get great cuts for a while, but then pretty soon the saw just isn't going to cut anymore. So I think we'll be forced to do some of those kinds of things and figure out how to apply them in the individual cultures of the businesses that you're working in.
That's great. So to the panel, we had some interesting some comments and questions come in on the chat, and I'm excited to share them. And one in particular that I think ties into this notion of this reconnecting and we're losing those bridge and those connections, Greg, is how are you handling new hires, and maybe what does that feel like? Elizabeth and Greg, you're a new guy that was just hired. How do you bring somebody on and onboard them? How do you get them integrated into a team? And Bob, how does technology play into that? I mean, how do you bridge all of those various gaps, when we're so used to having an in-person conversation when we're onboarding someone?
Yeah, it is tough, and all of those pieces play into it. The technology in particular, being able to have someone be able to connect right up front and be able to be a part of joining their team and being able to connect through their computer on day one, because that's the only way that they're able to do that, and getting onto the systems and having someone walk through that, I think that's key. I know that we have set up buddy systems to have people walk through and get key connections made right up front, but it's very different from the type of onboarding that we would have done for people coming into the office. Also, our technical support is making sure that they are on call for those people. There's no waiting in a queue to get your question answered or anything like that. Appointments are set up ahead of time, and we have to be very organized about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm really worried about the class of 2020. Anyone who is, not just new hires, newly promoted managers, new leaders in an organization. I think whatever we can do to help intentionally identify those productive connections that are required and go out of our way to help them find that and or encourage those individuals to discover those on their own. I think one of the reasons, back to your point, Chris, on where we're getting a productivity lift is because people are mostly focused heads down, doing their heads down work, which is fine and important. But what's not happening is that I think about how much work I strategically used to do in our cafeteria. That for me was one of the best places because I knew I would see our entire leadership team at one point during a 2-hour lunch come across the line. That's where I would do my work. And I shouldn't probably be saying that now, I'm giving my secrets away, but I would essentially stalk in the cafeteria for that just one quick question or that one update or to see what was happening in the organization. our new hires don't have that opportunity for that serendipity. And so I think being really intentional, helping them however we can to make those connections, back to Elizabeth's point, asking mentors to say, I've gone really out of my way recently to with new joiners to make those formal relationships. Hey, Allie, I want to introduce you to Tim. This is what Tim is doing. And so we need to, I think, help our folks out because they're really at risk, unfortunately. And the economic loss of new hires is not just limited to having to rehire that person. You think about the disruption to that new person. You typically work with 7 to 9 people. Those 7 to 9 people, if that person feels disconnected, doesn't have a sense of belonging, and leaves, you've not only disrupted that person leaving and you have that cost, but the snowball effect for those other 7 to 9 people who have built this relationship, who rely on that person who may leave or be marginalized in their performance. The economic losses is really significant unless we take action to help those people feel a sense of belonging.
Greg, one of the things that I think is a great suggestion that came from out in the field in our company, we tend to, as leaders, when we're onboarding or you've got this, you want to get people set up so that they can work immediately and get in there. But one of the things that they miss from coming into the office is the social connection. So those of you who have offices that are doing Zoom happy hours or coffee chats or whatever it might be, having something like that, so there is some kind of fun social connection, and establishing that early is really important as well.
So kind of transitioning, you just talked about the onboarding, and there's a great conversation that Dave Barton and Angela, CSX and BOA were speaking of kind of in the chat that I want to pivot to slightly. So we're talking about onboarding new employees. What are you guys seeing in the marketplace from using technology? Are you seeing people come back to the workforce? What do you think that's going to look like? How are you going to manage this quasi in-office workforce, out-of-office workforce, and how do you think that's going to play from a technology perspective? Increasing costs, increasing overhead, having to have multiple platforms, and then just the people side of that equation. Managing expectations, where are you going to be, where are you going to sit if our footprints begin to shrink. Maybe Bob, you could open us up a little bit on kind of how you see the future working with work from home versus in offices and where you think that's going.
Yeah, the kinds of conversations I've had with clients are around kind of in the future, once we feel like we can get back into the office more, frankly, not that much interested in just having people 5 days a week, but they're thinking about, do I have certain work groups come in on Mondays and other work groups come in on Tuesdays? And some kind of a schedule so that people still get the human to human contact, but you don't crowd the building as much as you used to. I think there's some good ideas there. And I think a little bit of that, frankly, could go a long ways towards reinforcing the relationships that then can continue to be sustained through the technology. The other thing I'll say is that it's pretty dependent on the nature of the work group. There are some work groups that are really well served by a group chat. And I think about product coders, application coders. Oftentimes they're just as happy never to have personal contact if they're in a chat session and they can dash off a direct message to somebody when they've got a question. And there are others, obviously, as you get into more mid-level management and broader responsibilities that do have much more value out of building relationships and not even just within their work team, but across work teams. And so I think as you design what that future looks like and when you're together and when you're not together, you got to consider all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm way too much of a geek on the future of work, which I'll apologize to all of our CFO colleagues on the. But I agree with Bob. I don't think I think whether the horse is out of the stable, the toothpaste is out of the the tube. It would be hard for me to believe that we would all want to get back in our cars and drive back into an office for 5 days a week to put our heads down and do the work that we used to do, at home. I agree with Bob. I think there's a third alternative that will likely emerge that will be some type of a hybrid that says we're going to oscillate between work. We're going to go and say, we're coming into the office to do this innovation, to do some planning, and then we're going to go back and we're going to get heads down. And it's going to vary by function. Our engineers are loving, this remote environment. But at the same time, we also have younger engineers who are living at home alone, maybe in urban environments. And they actually, it's our youngest engineers who want to get back into the workplace because that was also their social platform. That was the place that they were meeting and engaging, with other folks. So I think we're gonna build a purpose-built workplace that's going to be, designed for particular things, and then have the flexibility for people to, do that heads down work at home.
I would agree with that. I had a conversation with a manager just today who said, I'm kind of surprised, but someone that I was worried about and was their performance prior to this, I have found that having them work from home and some of the disruption that they caused before, they're far more productive and there's less disruption. They're now becoming a rock star. I think that I would like to ask her if she wants to work from home permanently. And I think that is the way that we have to think about this as an opportunity to fit, best ways that people work, and we're able to test that right now. I also think that there's a great opportunity as leases come up and different things that are happening, and we decide to reconfigure or let go of space. I've talked to a number of companies that are, trying to consider their options, not really knowing what the future looks like. We're doing that here in our corporate office. And at the top of the year, we were planning on taking more space. And now I think that what we'll do is we're going to reconfigure space. People who only come in half a week will probably do a desk share, and we'll have hoteling stations that we would, that people who want to come in on a irregular basis can come in but know that they have a place to sit up and a docking station and a phone and everything that they need, and more collaboration space for teams to come together for particular meetings. So we're going to configure our space to just better fit, instead of saying, okay, it has to go back to the way it was. Let's take advantage of what we're learning here and make it better for us.
So let's shift that conversation on its head for a second. That sounds great if you've got a very forward-looking and progressive boss. As a boss of 23 people who loves to see people in FaceTime, I don't necessarily love that. How do you communicate that? CFOs are oftentimes the guys, right in the front lines, having to battle sometimes some of these battles on pushing the envelope. What advice do you have for the CFOs here to give to them to talk about their CEOs, to talk with their CEOs and executives teams to push this conversation forward, saying, hey, I know this was the old way. That's how it always worked. That's what we have to do, but we need to start thinking different.
Wow, if I had the answer to that.
I was hoping you did.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just pitch in for some. I do think that in general, what was interesting is I think much of the, if you will, the future of work or the future of how workforce would work was generally constrained by this concern that maybe I can't trust people. Maybe people can't work autonomously. Maybe, and while absolutely there were some people who maybe for certain reasons struggled in a more autonomous context, I think in general most people would have to say, back to the Elizabeth's earlier point, like people generally rallied. Like the nature, if you've hired thoughtful people, if you've done a good job in hiring, then you likely can, let people be, they will be generally successful with good guidance, with good. So I actually think this has been just unfortunately, a giant global experiment in removing some of those maybe obstacles or concerns or risks. Well, if I went ahead with this, I was talking to one very large facilities leader of a very large bank who in January presented to their board and said, there is absolutely no way, we've done a year-long study, there's no way we can work from home. 4 weeks later, everyone was working from home. Necessity was the mother of invention here. So I think a lot of the obstacles, I'm hoping that some of those obstacles, not that, one size fits all, not that everyone, and it's a huge portion of the workforce that has to show up in stores and in places to manufacture things. But I think it's been a fascinating time that I hope will have dissolved some of that risk, if you will. Gosh, we can't make this work. Most people did. So it's just fascinating.
So kind of on that note, then let's talk a little bit about, where we see this going in the future, maybe some things that are innovative, some things that you guys are seeing out there that maybe isn't Zoom the mainstream now, right? In the McKinsey article, not to keep coming back to this, they said that in less than 6 months, we experienced approximately 2.5 decades worth of technology improvements and implementations. So in my mind, now we've set the precedent, right? We're all sitting here, we've implemented this, we've got Zoom. What do you guys see coming down the pike? As we come up on the end of this panel, what do you guys see coming down the pike? What are some things you're seeing in the workforces that isn't a Zoom, that it's something different that you think might gain some traction that our CFOs can be starting to think about now? Artificial intelligence, anything like that?
So I'm super.
I guess I'll start. Oh, I'm sorry, Greg, go.
No, please.
Okay. I think it's risky to try and think of things as, I'm going to say far out, as artificial intelligence. There are, let me put it this way. I think there's going to come a period soon where it's going to be more rationalization of what we've done. You made the point, Chris, that you've got 7 or 11 or some large number of collaboration software. And I would be willing to bet that's fairly standard. People have tried to quickly respond and put some things in place. There's probably too much in place. And I think one logical next step is to kind of simplify and streamline some of that stuff and get down to what you really need to solve the business problem and to support the business. I think then, and maybe some forward-thinking companies are already going down this path. There are things like robotic process automation and technologies that are more closely aligned to the way we've done work before, but allow us to do it with less human contact requirements. I think some of those things will be the next step. I don't think we're ready for, well, I'll just stop there. I do think it's, I'll say one thing, it's a little bit dangerous there will be some forward-thinking people who will take this as an opportunity to push ideas that may not really be ready for prime time yet. And when I hear artificial intelligence, there are a lot of good uses for artificial intelligence, and it's being used in a lot of businesses. I think thinking about it broadly to solve some of these problems is maybe a step too far.
Greg or Elizabeth, any thoughts on this kind of forward-looking, maybe from a people perspective? What are some of the new forwarding, CFOs, a lot of CFOs here end up being the de facto HR department as well. What are some new things that this pandemic has brought about that maybe forward-looking CFOs, HR departments should be thinking about in managing their people, assuming that this is the new norm? What are some forward-thinking thought processes that maybe we should all be having? For me specifically, I'd love to know. How do I evaluate my workforce not being near them?
Greg, you started to say something. I definitely have something to chime in with, but you go ahead, please.
No, well, so I do think, and I'm gonna maybe contradict Bob just a little bit on that, but I do think, and I'm way too geeky on this. I probably know too much to be dangerous, but I was really struck by one of the biggest changes, one of the biggest sort of opportunities that we saw in the pandemic was the notion of workforce planning. How do you really think about disrupting the notion of a particular job, or that someone can only do that job. And so obviously there were lots of organizations who needed to furlough folks. There were lots of organizations who needed new folks. There's actually a coalition of companies that have created something called People Plus Work Exchange, where you can say, I have 300 retail folks in Atlanta available who might need those people. So there were a lot of really very ingenious things. I think one of the things that has really come out of that for me is thinking about a skill-based economy. And this is where I do think we will see sooner than later. Full disclosure, Workday has a product on this. I don't mean this to be a commercial, but it is something that I've seen work, is this idea of thinking about people not in very narrow roles, but thinking about what skills they have. And where I do think machine learning, maybe not artificial intelligence, but I'll use machine learning as a narrow component of that, to actually be able to inventory skills have, experiences people want to have, and then actually look at gigs, if you will, or bodies of work, and then find the group that best matches that. An example for me would be in healthcare. Imagine if we could look at patient data and we could look at healthcare worker data and say, gosh, Elizabeth and Greg and Bob have those skills that are best positioned to help Sally recover from her situation. Here are the skills they have. Here's the way they've worked together in the past. Here's the cohesion and the trust that they have from each other. They all worked with Dr. Chris at one point, and so they know how to work together. So I do think this is going to be an early application, this idea of looking at work and saying, I believe this person or this team is the best person to do this. And two, I think we sort of unlocked a bit of that. Someone has to be an employee in this role for a period of time, as opposed to beginning to democratize jobs into work and say, wow, Elizabeth has the skills to crush that piece of work. She's got some availability. I think the ball has started to roll on this in a way that we can't go backwards. The technology is still emerging, but this is where I think from a human capital perspective, the sort of advent of much more open marketplaces, even within your organization or outside your organization, is just going to make sense. It's going to make sense for the individual, and it's going to make sense for the organization.
I think that is so fascinating. I love that being able to look at things that way and workforce planning, and it really is the future of the way that we bring people in. One of the things that I was thinking about, Chris, when you mentioned this, was the ask of our leaders to help our sales teams. And in the struggle that they are having without being able to meet with prospects face to face, and how to make sure that you're continuing to drive business there, and are we giving them innovative tools to do that? And so Zoom is always there. A lot of people have Zoom fatigue, but I think that we're constantly looking for how do we more easily enable our sales and our client service teams to have customer service stuff at their fingertips, and learn more from that perspective to be able to make it easier. Nothing needs to be harder for a salesperson right now, because it's hard when you're not able to lean on a lot of that natural charisma that you are able to experience when you're face to face. And so every advantage that we can give them that makes it easier for them is so important. And so we are continuously looking for technology that helps enable that. I don't know exactly all those answers. We're still, looking at all of that and trying to build that. But I think that is a key area, because as we're looking at, how we're doing our business, we've got to continue to make sure that we're growing it.
So there was another great question, and I know we're about 10 minutes out, but I wanted to get to two more quick points. There was a question that came through the chat, which ties perfectly. It's as if you guys are reading my mind. So our fourth polling question, I want to point something out. The polling question was, what's the greatest disadvantage for the remote workforce? And by a sweeping margin, they said social isolation, which I can't disagree with at all. I voted for that as well. But then tied into this is a really interesting question from Angela. I want to give credit where credit's due. You know, how do you develop, knowing that it's socially isolated, knowing we've got a varying degree of leaders, knowing we've got 36 different technology platforms, how do you develop employees? What can you be doing? Greg, you mentioned this, the class of 2020, maybe it was Elizabeth, I apologize, fearing for the class of 2020. What can we be doing as thought leaders, as organizational leaders, to make sure we're doing our best to develop that next level of leadership in our organizations?
Greg, you go ahead. I know.
I'll let you know. I'll start us out, Elizabeth, and then if you could, say something smart so that people forget whatever I said. At least from the research I read, what's been fascinating is actually there has been a positive explosion in people. In addition to their productivity, they're spending more time learning. They're taking that commute time. So there has actually been, and Josh Burson, who's a great analyst in this space, wrote an article on this yesterday, just seeing a tremendous explosion. So interestingly enough, I do think that on demand, people are taking the time and appreciate the importance of that. I would say the thing that we have to sort of help people understand is what I would call this new capability called social agility. And it really is, as we see, to Bob's earlier point, while I still think automation, AI, but over time, the cognitive components of roles will continue to be taken over or done by machine learning. That's just the path we're on. And so what I think it does is it puts this increased pressure on this capability called social agility. How do I, back to Elizabeth's point, how do I influence people? Maybe I don't have that, how do I quickly connect with new people? If we see the gig economy unfolding the way I might expect, sprints of work being done, how do I very quickly build trust with that person to help them know what I can do to accelerate those relationships? And so I think it's going to be a big part of that if we're remote, is that intentionality by which we help people make those connections and support them. The technical skills are not that hard. Actually, the World Economic Forum published just a few days ago the top 10 skills that they believe the world needs, and overwhelmingly they're what we would call the soft skills or the human skills or the socially agile skills. It's not as much the technical skills anymore. It is the interpersonal skills. It's the creativity. It's the engagement. It's the, it's the influence that we're going to see more and more of. So that's what makes me a little nervous is how we do that work. Technical skills I'm less concerned about because people can consume those in more traditional ways. It's the role modeling of, wow, how do I watch that great leader learn, gosh, look at the way they handled that difficult situation. I'm learning from that. So it's this idea of social agility for me. That's the capability that's going to have some of the greatest value.
When you think about the things that we miss sometimes with in this remote environment, opportunities for learning by inclusion and just being able to, as you said, Greg, observe how other people handle things. We are missing out on that a lot. And other things happening in our world today, a lot of people are also focused on, inclusion and diversity and how are we building in all of that. And it is, when it comes to learning and how we're doing that, being able to include people that don't necessarily, they want to learn by watching and being a part of. We need to be very conscious of when we can make those opportunities more available, because when you're an executive and you are just, I know my days are stacked morning till night with Zoom meetings, and I'm not always thinking where I might grab somebody from my team and say, come in here, just sit and be a fly on the wall and listen to how we conduct this meeting or how we are coaching this person. Those opportunities are lost and are not lost, but we just have to be very deliberate with them. And so it's something else that we can consider.
So I want to wrap up. We got about 5 minutes to wrap up. I first want to thank everybody for attending, but I want to wrap up with one overarching theme question, which is we focused a lot on managing the workforce. We've talked about different technologies, streamlining it, what it looks like. But if there's one piece of data that I find absolutely fascinating, is this concept that for the first time, technology is driving what is being referred to as positive psychology with technology. And the concept coming out of an article is that technology and the way people are using technology is driving some certain positive psychological experiences for people. Maybe it's the work from home, maybe it's the no longer commuting, the time for education. So, thinking about the positives that can come out of this from a human capital side and a resource side, if you could give the CFOs a parting word of advice here today, what would that parting word of advice be relative to this remote workforce and how we can see this as a positive and not just another hurdle in our everyday experience? And maybe Bob, if you wouldn't mind, I'll maybe start off with you. I'd love to get each panelist's point of view on this one.
Yeah, I'll go first. I think it's a great point that it can be very positive. It can also be very negative, right? We've talked a little bit about Zoom fatigue and the proliferation of technologies that you've got to keep track of. So I think, to me, it becomes a question of setting the expectation for the way you want people to do their jobs and how you want them to take advantage of technology, so that you start with the people and the way you want the group to work together and the way you want people to interact, and then provide the technologies that do that without over providing technology that just becomes a burden. Not a simple thing to do, but it requires rethinking a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, right? This is all a little bit different than what we're used to. And I think if done well, the technology can be an absolute help. And if done badly, the technology can become burdensome.
Elizabeth, how about you?
I was going to say that to Bob's point about we're not going to solve it all. You don't have to jump all the way in, but just continue to think and innovate agilely. Really move one step at a time. Talk with your leaders about tackling the issue or the opportunity at hand, and don't try and solve for what is going to be next year that we don't know about, or just continue to move forward. Don't be frozen, and innovate in a way that keeps that forward momentum and not having you stop, but also not paralyzing you by really trying to figure out the unknown that none of us have any idea of what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I'll offer maybe a little bit, to stay on theme for me, at least, a sort of wacky perspective. So I'm also a fan of the book that Bob had mentioned, Team of Teams. And one of the interesting things I think is about that book is they really talked about the fact that it was the changing nature, in this case of warfare, moving to, cells and other types that required the military to move from its hierarchically only way of working to actually look and shift the way it operated to reflect the way, in this case, the enemy was operating. And so there was this really dramatic change that Stanley McChrystal and Chris Fussell, the co-authors of that, talk about, that where they realized the way they had been fighting the war historically, and they'd been fighting wars for maybe 300 years, was no longer relevant when the enemy, in this case, had fundamentally changed the way they operated. So they needed to evolve. I might offer up, from a productivity, from a CFO perspective and an HR perspective as well, what if we're at this point where we're seeing the opportunity to fundamentally rethink the way we work, to embrace new technologies, to build work around people rather than have people organize around work? And so there could be, it's in my mind that we could be looking at a similar time today than what we saw in the US from about 1919 to 1930, where some of the major innovations in the way we work and work productivity got invented. I think we're at a similar place. And so I look at it not at that lens of, well, let's hope this goes away and we can go back. I think that's going to be the great divide, the great sort of COVID chasm. There will be some people who see this as opportunity and say, wow, how would I use this unique situation as an opportunity to reimagine and reinvent work? Then there'll be some that will go back. I think that will, leave a group behind. So I guess I would just say, what if we were at this sort of pivotal point in the future of work, the future of the next level of productivity? How would we take advantage of that if that was true?
Great. Well, before we open it up to any questions. I just want to take a minute and thank Bob, Elizabeth, and Greg. You guys have been great. I will probably reach out to each of you individually to get more pointers. For the panel's sake, I just want to make sure everyone's clear. We do not endorse Team of Teams. We get no commissions for the sale of the book, but it sounds like a good one. I'm going to go read it. But with that, I would love to open it up to the group as a whole of the CFO. If anybody wants to raise their hands, Jennifer can help maintain some level of order, see if there's any questions for the panels, etc.
Well, I found it really interesting, especially what you just said, Greg, at the very end there. I wonder what the answer to that question is. What will it be? What will be our new normal? But any other thoughts or questions for the panelists?
Everyone's clearly excited for trivia, Jennifer.
That's right. people better turn your videos
I'm excited.
No, I think that's really interesting, and I really appreciate you guys being here today. Chris, thank you for moderating. Did an excellent job, of course, and Elizabeth, thank you, and Greg and Bob, and you guys are welcome to stay on. But we are going to. I'm looking for Jack Healy. Are you pop? There he is. He's going to be our master of ceremonies for the trivia side of this hour. And everybody's welcome to stay on. We're going to do a trivia contest. Jack has got this all figured out, I believe. And also just do some networking. So if you want to post your LinkedIn in the chat area, or, say a few words when you answer the question incorrectly or correctly, feel free to do so, because we run it. We're trying to do more to keep us engaged, of course, in a social way as well as an educational way.
So Bob Riddle has called me trivial many a time, so I think he's the.
I've called you a lot of things, Jack. We should not do anything.
All right, so I have the ability to share my screen.
Yeah.
All right, so.
Pete, don't shoot. Oh, I'm not.
Ooh, somebody's in a tunnel. All right, come on, come here, yay. All right, welcome to trivia. So our topic tonight is movie trivia. Now, you're gonna see the question actually for 30 seconds. 1 minute is too long, I tried this out. Don't call out your answers, but you can work as a team. So I know some of you are friends, and you can go on private chat with your team member. You can figure out how you're going to split the $50 Amazon gift card, but you can work alone, and you can pull somebody else in the room with you if you want to. So if you want to grab a spouse or a kid or whatever, you're free to do that. It's kind of like picture us at a pub. You can't use the internet or your cell phone, all that, right? We're not going to cheat. We're all ethical people. We're going to go through the 20 questions and then give you the answers at the end. And then you're going to use the chat just to tell me how many you got correct. Honor system again. And then if in case of a tie, built into the deck is a tiebreaker question. So no chance to